So good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar entitled Re-Entry to Work, Key Strategies for Adjusting to Change Through COVID and Beyond. My name is Sabrina Dimitra, and I'm AMSA's Settlement and Integration Program Manager, and I'll be facilitating today's event. I'm joined today by the AMSA team, Chandrima Mazumdar, AMSA's Policy and Research Analyst, and Sarah Sahik, AMSA's Engagement Coordinator. So grateful and thankful for the team for helping put together today's webinar. So before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge, where I'm located and where many of you are located. And so as a provincial umbrella association, AMSA would like to acknowledge that BC is home to over 200 First Nations and recognizing that we're all joining from different areas of the province today. We would also like to express and recognize the privilege that we have as settlers on this land. We wish to acknowledge that the AMSA operations is located on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. I'd also like to acknowledge and recognize that I'm joining you today from the unceded territories of the Stolo, Kwantlen, and Katzie First Nations. And so I just like to acknowledge and recognize the unprecedented times that our sector is currently experiencing. We're in the middle of a federal election. We're in the middle of an Afghan refugee resettlement period. As well, we're living and experiencing the changes and the dynamic changes that are happening due to COVID-19. And so all of this is an area where it's unprecedented, and at the same time we're here providing support to the newcomers through settlement and integration services. So really just wanted to acknowledge this and also take the time to recognize the timeliness of today's webinar. And so I'd like to welcome our speaker, Linda Monk. And Linda has been a friend of AMSA for many years now. And we've called upon Linda to provide, webinar input, training at various different stages. I know last year, Linda was part of as part of our summit for BC settlement and integration service providers. We've done a webinar on change management in the past. So it's great to welcome Linda back today. And so we've shared Linda's bio as part of the registration, but just really briefly, just wanted to acknowledge and highlight that Linda is the founder and director of Thrive Training and Coaching, and that she offers training, workshops, webinars to various different institutions, government, nonprofit. And so we're really glad and excited to welcome Linda back here today. So without further ado, I would like to hand it over to Linda to go to the content portion of today's webinar.
Well, thank you for that introduction, and thank you for being here, everyone. I know this is a busy time, and as the word we've heard many times over the last year and a half plus, unprecedented times. And our topic today is around re-entry to work and taking a look at some strategies for adjusting to what is sometimes being called the new normal, the next normal during COVID and beyond. And of course, none of us have ever had to do something quite like this under circumstances quite like these. So we're learning as we go. And I invite you during the presentation to listen for things that can be helpful to you, practical strategies that can have some application right away that can help make what is very challenging at this time, hopefully somewhat easier, and just give you some real tools and perspectives to hold on to while we move forward. So our time together today, I want to take a look at the current reality and just give us a chance to reflect on what that's looking like. We'll focus in on disruptive change and transition, because COVID really has been a time of disruptive change, to say the least. And with that, we want to look at what are some adjustment strategies as people navigate such high levels of adjustment, people coming back into work after working at home, people who've been on the front lines and have been out in the public and workforce in that way all along, and to really tap into some resilient strategies at multiple levels. So we'll look at some strategies specifically for leaders and managers and for teams. Teams are really needing to recalibrate right now together. And also as individuals, what are things to keep in mind that can help with carrying the stress load that many people are under, and also to support your own resilience as you do your important work. So as Sabrina mentioned, this time will be interactive. It is being recorded, and I will provide the slides afterwards for your notes. And I really just invite you, while we go through, to jot down things that resonate with you. If there's something that you really want to remember that can have value for you, keep a running list, if you wish, of key points that you'd like to bear in mind beyond the webinar. So we know that change and uncertainty is always part of life. We're good at change. All of you, I'm sure, are very change resilient. We've all been through lots of changes. And the global pandemic, which is important for us to keep in mind, of course, we're still in. There's lots of different stages of it, but we're not through it yet. It's brought a lot of change, and it's brought a lot of uncertainty, and with it a lot of emotional responses to what's going on as individuals, in our organizations, and of course in society as a whole. So what does this mean for us as people, as workplaces, in teams, in various parts? I know many of you are working in different parts of our province. I myself live over on Salt Spring Island between Vancouver and Victoria. And so our location, our place, has shaped our experience of this as well. How COVID has impacted rural and remote communities compared to urban centers. All of that plays out, of course, in terms of what's going on now as more and more people re-enter work. So I want to start with a poll. I just want to get a sense of who's here and give you a chance collectively to have a sense of who's here. I'll just launch this poll now, and I'm sure most of you have probably had an experience with polls on Zoom. We're all Zoom experts at this point, or many of us might feel that way. So if you're working directly with clients, maybe you're supervising staff who work directly with clients, departmental manager, maybe you're a senior organizational leader, executive director, and perhaps some other category that isn't listed here. So I'll just give you a moment. So you can see that 33% are frontline workers dealing directly with clients, 30% are supervising staff, 6% are department managers, 12% senior leaders, and 18% other. So every level of an organization is represented in our group today. So I invite you to, there may be some parts that feel more relevant to you than others, depending on the role that you fulfill. And I trust there's something here for everyone. And thank you very much for completing the survey. So I also want to thank you for the work that you've been doing. It is, as you know, your work makes a huge difference to people, and all of the different roles you represent make a difference in unique and different ways. And everyone has had to step up and make decisions, adjust to a lot, to cope with the extra stressors and worries that have been so much a part of this uncertain COVID time. And of course, you're supporting people with your clients that you serve who are also dealing with that while they're dealing with many other adjustments and changes as newcomers to Canada, and all the different ways that you support people in the settlement sector. So you're having your own experience of the pandemic, you're supporting people who are having their own experience of the pandemic. And so it makes for a lot of different elements and extra pressures, as you well know. And being someone who's in a type of work that's about helping other people during this COVID time has been so complex and nuanced, and it's really called upon our skills in new ways. It's called upon our compassion. It's called upon our resilience, and it's happening over time. So there was life before COVID, and it's, you know, it's like having a child, a new baby. When our babies are little, we say, oh, they're 3 months old or 6 months old. But by the time they're 10, we don't say they're, 120 months or whatever the math would be. That's not the right math, but we stop counting the days and the weeks and the months as time goes on. And the same is true with COVID. It used to be, we're day 100, 227, or we're month number 6. And now we're into this year and a half plus time. And so the rest of life, of course, doesn't stop because we're in a pandemic. It keeps moving along, albeit shaped dramatically by what we're going through. And we're still in this life during COVID time. And of course, we're all looking forward into the future, into life after COVID. But what's true about that is we don't yet know what that will be. We don't yet know how our workplaces, our lives, our society, our politics, our healthcare system, and so many other parts of life will really land after this is over and into the future. And the language around new normal and next normal, I do a lot of work with individual clients and different teams. And what I'm hearing, and I'm sure you're hearing as well, is that nothing feels normal to a lot of people. People feel disoriented, unsure. They don't feel as grounded and centered. They don't really know what's coming next. And so that's playing out as people re-enter the workforce. And it's important to know that as a result of all the change that we've all been going through and uncertainty, that there is a lot of people feeling very depleted and exhausted, including staff who are re-entering the workforce. They're not necessarily coming back and re-entering feeling, really fresh and revitalized. They can be coming back feeling really just disoriented and tired and gearing up to try to meet all that's here now and next. We've heard so many different terms used around COVID, including I've heard the expression more than once of this COVID cloud, that this pandemic descended upon us without warning, and it's felt like a bit of a dark cloud. Everyone's having their own unique experience in it, of course, and it's being extended over time. And I have a friend who's a marathon runner, a mountain marathon runner in Switzerland. And she was saying it's a lot like a marathon, except we didn't know we were training for it. And that you run and run, you cover all those miles, and then it's often the last stretch of a marathon that's the hardest, where we really have to dig in, we have to give more, we have to push harder and keep going. And I think that's in some ways the phase we're in now. There's people having all different reactions, just ready to have it over with. People, leaders who are having to navigate bringing people back into the workforce, workers who are coming back into the workforce if they haven't already been there. And what's really important for all of us to keep in mind is the volume of change that COVID has brought. And that's unique for everyone. But the change load is what triggers that sense of uncertainty, stress. And if we think about all the areas of possible change, and I just invite you to think for yourself, if you, for example, were drawing a wheel with some spokes coming off of it, and you were writing down, and I've done this exercise, writing down what changes have happened in your life because of COVID. Of course, there's been all of the social types of changes, social distancing and wearing masks, and more time online for many people. There's been changes in health. There's been people who've had COVID and recovered from COVID and still dealing with COVID. There's also people who've lost people to COVID. And one of my clients that I work with lost her sister, and within a couple-week period lost her brother-in-law, her sister's husband, to COVID. And so there's very real losses happening. And if that's someone who's listening, to know that there's extra tenderness around that grieving process that we need time and space for individually and collectively. There's been changes to relationships. There's been high levels of disruption in marriages and rates of marital separation are they're being reported as being doubled, a recent statistic I heard. So there's a lot of disruption in the family and with people's finances and mental health. Mental health is something that people, the healthcare system and the Canadian Mental Health Association and other organizations are tracking carefully. And what we're seeing is that people who had pre-existing conditions, for example, of anxiety, depression, are reporting that that's much higher. It's exacerbated during this time. And there's many people who never had reported pre-existing mental health conditions who are now dealing and struggling with that in some cases. So all of this is playing out in our immediate personal lives. And then of course that plays out in the face of the workplace as well. There's also been a lot of increased racism, and particularly among our Asian population, and of course other groups of people. And we've just so much is happening. We're having not only a global health crisis with the pandemic, but we've also seen political crises and unrest. We've seen social justice unrest. I remember seeing a photo of the protests around Black Lives Matter. And on one hand, thousands of people gathering around a social justice issue. Well, at the same time in society, everyone, sort of more isolated and at home trying to stay safe with the pandemic. So we are in very transformative times, and re-entry to work is one of the areas that more attention is being given so that we can do it well. And for those who've been there all along, we can support in meaningful ways to really be mindful of what's real about the stress load and change load that people are carrying during this time. And I know that can be on a big continuum. I was recently connecting with a local firefighter here on Salt Spring, and he said COVID really hadn't changed his life much at all. We live in a small rural place. He's a first responder. That hasn't changed. There's a bit more safety protocol. Nothing about his livelihood or his routines or his family have fundamentally changed during COVID. It's been very minimal disruptive change for him. All the way on the spectrum to people describing their lives just completely unrecognizable, just completely turned upside down and very chaotic and very difficult to navigate. So we have a wide range of experiences, as you know, and of course then in your teams and your workplaces with your colleagues, when we keep that in mind, we know that it's a time for considerable compassion and understanding so that people can feel supported as we continue to walk down this path and go out into a re-entry and eventually into a post-pandemic time. Again, we're not there yet. So I'd like to share a second poll around change, and in particular, how much change you've experienced during the COVID pandemic. And there's no right or wrong answer. We just want to get a snapshot in our group today. Has it been significant? There's been some changes, minimal changes, and maybe you feel you haven't had to adapt to change during the pandemic. Even wearing a mask in public, is a change, but they may feel minimal depending on your experience, your past, what you've known in your own life. 45% are reporting significant levels of change. 38% some changes, 15% minimal change, and 3%, which is one person, have not had to adapt to change. So when we look at that picture based on what's represented here in our group today, you could see that the vast majority have had some, and nearly half have had significant change. And why does this matter? It matters because the more change that we have to cope with, the more we need our resilience. So change is the thing that happens, and this is important to keep in mind. Change is what happens. It's the circumstance, it's the event, it's the pandemic, it's the change of going from working at home to re-entering the workforce, and so forth. Change is all those things on the list I shared a moment ago and more. Transition is our emotional response to change. Transition is all that we have to do with our physical resources, our mental resources, our workplace resources to adapt to those changes. And so adaptation takes a lot of energy. It can be stressful, and it can be tiring, which is in part why so many people are feeling very tired at this time. And we want to look ahead, of course, into a re-entry, and to also to acknowledge what's impacting things now. So disruptive change, and COVID in particular has brought a lot of disruptive change, has caused a lot of different emotional responses, a lot of different emotions, because emotions is what we cope with as we deal with transition. And transition is what we go through when we deal with change. So I don't need to read all of this, you can see it there. But there's been lots of overwhelm and exhaustion and stress and more. So if you're feeling any of these things, and a lot of people are, maybe most people, we're not alone. It's an understandable and normal response to such high levels of disruptive change, because we are going through a lot of transition. And so this then, of course, plays out not just with us as individuals, but it plays out in our workplaces and teams as well. And it can impact productivity, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. It's had bearing on teamwork and how teams connect and work together. It's impacted communication, how much, in what ways, direct communication versus online communication. There's changes in the work itself. There's been a constant reorganizing around what are the priorities now and what are the priorities now, and constantly shifting sands with all of this. Of course, location of work, and that will continue to be a big conversation. I was listening to a radio interview the other day on the CBC, and they were saying that over 50% of workers in Canada moved to working at home during the pandemic. And the figure that is being discussed about how many will actually return to work the way it was after the pandemic is about 20%. So of course, that's going to impact how teams work, how remote work gets aligned, and how it becomes more prominent in many workplaces. It's going to impact work relationships, and it's going to impact communities. So if 30% of Canadian workforce doesn't return to work where they were, that's going to impact what spaces are rented. It's going to impact the dry cleaner on the corner who normally services the people that go to that building every day, the coffee shops, and so forth. So the ripple effect of changes are yet to be seen in our own unique workplaces and in society as a whole. And of course, there's been lots of operational changes, things around safety protocol and so forth. And feel welcome to pop in the chat as you're sitting and listening what other impacts you've noticed, particularly in the workplace, changes that have been present in addition to what you see here on this list, because of course this isn't all inclusive. It's just to get us appreciating the vastness of change that's been happening at the individual level, at the team level, and at the workplace level. So if there's something else in your own experience that stands out, feel welcome to use the chat. What changes have been really prevalent in your own work experience, and we can learn from each other's experiences by taking a look at that. A dear friend of mine, Greg Brown, he's an expert in the field of change management. And he said, it's been said many times, it's not about the changes, It's about our reactions to them. Organizations and individuals are forced to shift and change under the current reality that the future offers no new normal to seek refuge. So not only are we coping with change, but we're a bit untethered in terms of what we're anchoring into to navigate into the future, because it's not a clear picture yet. And as you know, as Sabrina mentioned, and all of you know more directly than myself, the impacts, for example, of all that's real about the Afghan resettlement and all of the work and heart work and logistical work that will be in that reality alone, and of course the election and so forth. So we're in a situation where change isn't slowing down, and being able to tap into our resilience to cope with it and do our best work under these circumstances, including at this time of reentry, is really important. And I'll just take a quick peek at the chat here. Hi Ryan, nice to see you here. The complexity of the work, the higher needs of clients. Yeah, productivity. Some days are easier than others working from home, work-life balance. Yeah, thank you, Natasha. Yeah, so work, we can't just look at work based on the quantitative measures of it. In other words, the qualitative, what the work feels like, the work being more complex, the needs of clients being more complex, our own needs and stress levels potentially being more complex. It's not just business as usual. And that's an important tip and to keep in mind as you look at re-entry. It's simply not enough to say, okay, everybody's coming back to work, let's just carry on where we left off. And I'm not suggesting that anyone's doing that, but there can be this desire to move forward and get back to normal, to get back to the way it was, or to try to get to what's familiar, to anchor into that. And that may not be what people can orient to, because so much has changed and continues to change. You'll know best in your own unique workplaces what's true about that. We also know, all of us know, that change can also bring opportunities and new possibilities. It can also bring new needs, new challenges, new responses, and it can bring greater resilience. And we want to really look at our resilience because it is the cornerstone, the real bedrock to how we re-enter work and how we adapt and move forward. So resilience is our ability to bounce back during times of adversity. It's how we stay productive and high performing during disruptive change. It's also how we maintain our own physical, emotional, and mental well-being so we can use our energy productively and direct it in the areas it needs to go, and how we can really hold that compassionate response to the people that we are supporting in our respective work and organizations. So I like to think of resilience as like this well we can draw upon. We can draw upon it in the collective, in our teams. We can draw upon it within ourselves and within our both our personal and our professional lives. And so let's take a look around. We'll do some connecting and reflection and generate some ideas. And also by the end of the session, I hope you each leave with some real action steps. Here's some things I'm going to do that can support this adapting time during this re-entry to work phase. What we know from the research on resilience and coping with high levels of disruptive change is that connection, peer connection, human connection, meaningful connection contributes significantly to resilience. So I'd like to give you a chance to connect with some fellow participants who are here to have a discussion, and you're welcome to take a picture of the slide so you remember what you're talking about when you get together. Shanjima, if you're able, perhaps the questions could be posted in the small groups. I'm going to put you into small groups of, I'll just see how many we have here, about 4 people, 3 or 4. And we're going to go for 8 minutes, so a couple of minutes each, to give voice to what's been easy during this COVID time. There may be things that are easier. Perhaps you're not having a big commute you used to, for example. What's been harder or more challenging? And what has surprised you? So what's been easier, harder, if anything? I know there are those places, and what surprised you? And it's just a quick chance in your small group to give voice to this, hear from others. We learn from each other's experiences. Our resilience is also activated in the presence of conversation and connection like this. So I will put you into your small groups now. Welcome back, everyone. We're going to look at some specific strategies, keeping in mind all that we've shared so far this morning. And we're going to do that looking at 3 different levels, because there are unique considerations at the leadership and management level, at the team level, and also at the individual level when it comes to adapting and coping with change, tapping into resilience, and different tips, really practical tips to keep in mind for this re-entry to work phase. So I invite you to think about when we think about resilience in the settlement sector, we are really looking at that in a sector where caring and supporting others is very central to what you do. It's very much part of the occupational core, your mission, your mandate. And there is a lot of focus on caring outward to the clients and people that are served. And part of what you're invited to do during this re-entry to work phase is to also really look at what are the care and support needs of the people doing the work. And that question needs to really be leading the way. It's always important to be thinking that way, but it's really important now to support and sustain the workforce, particularly when your workforce has a lot of extra responsibilities happening with the Afghan resettlement and many other things, of course. So the question of leadership, it's always about people. Those of you that are senior level leaders here, EDs, maybe policy makers, managers to frontline staff, you know that leadership is always about people. It's about helping other people to do their best in the context with it that they're in. It's about supporting people to do the work that they're there to do. And as leaders, we often have a very future-oriented perspective. We can be moving quite quickly, making decisions quite quickly. And of course, that's very important. And right now, it's important to also consider that some people might not be moving that fast. During this re-entry phase, there's an adaptation time and a reorientation time that's needed. The other is that it's important to care for our leaders and managers, because there's a lot of additional pressure and stressors and uncertainties. No one's ever done this before. No one's ever brought a workforce back from working at home for well over a year. And I know that your organizations will each have your own picture on that. Some of you may have had the vast majority of your staff working from home. Some there could have been a blend and so forth. So you need to be, of course, you're the expert of your own reality on that and experience. But to know that the principles of taking care of yourself as a leader and what your support needs are really important at this time. And as a colleague that I've worked with, I haven't for some time now, but she's retired now, Dr. Patricia Fisher, she was talking during COVID about how leadership is critical and central at this time. Again, it's always important. We all know that, but it's really important right now. And many people might be fulfilling leadership roles, and tasks, including peer leadership roles. People that maybe normally don't see themselves in a leadership role in their workplace, maybe being called upon for leadership skills, for extra helping with extra direction, maybe being asked to do things they maybe haven't done before, and so forth. So we want to really support our leaders, and also to know that the work that you're doing as leaders is of course important at all times and critically important right now. So what are some areas that leaders might be paying attention to during this re-entry to work phase, and employees, what are people paying attention to? One of the things I'm hearing a lot from different managers I work with in my coaching practice, and also frontline staff, is the conversation around productivity. And of course, we know productivity is always something we're thinking about at work. How efficient are we? How productive? How engaged? All of these things are part of a positive workplace culture, a high-performing teams. And at this time, productivity is a big conversation. In part, there's been conversations around, have people been more productive or less productive working at home? Of course, that depends. What kind of levels of productivity can people have when stress and uncertainty is still high? How does that play out? And so it's important to keep in mind as leaders that everyone will be having a different experience related to their productivity, and also how they feel about it. Some people are feeling, some of my clients I work with, they're feeling so good about how productive they've been during COVID. Others are feeling just really out of sync with what would be their normal levels of productivity, and wondering how they're ever going to get back to what that looked like before. So we want to talk about productivity conscientious of the times we're in, not as a burden to people, but as a support. What do people need around their productivity? Because this is really a time of people regaining control. Individuals are trying to regain control of lots of different moving parts, coming back to work, adjusting to that. It's important to think about workload and how much other change is being asked of people. So really being, as a leader, conscientious to monitor the change load. So if there are changes that are needed in the workplace, to be sure that the priority ones are what are being focused on, and minimizing the volume of change where possible at an organizational and systemic level, and really prioritizing those to not add to that change burden that a lot of people, including leaders, are carrying right now. And it's also a time where people are trying to create new work habits, just like people had to create a lot of new work habits moving out of the workplace to work at home and find a space and get the setup they needed, and work with the surround of their personal lives to create the space for work and all of those things. There's also equally an adaptation and time to adjust to come re-enter work, to recalibrate on the home front to what needs to change to come back to work, to re-engage with colleagues and the work itself in the workplace. So I really like my colleague who I work with regularly, Eric Meso. He has a mantra that he kind of keeps up in his forefront each day in his own work, and that is to do the next right thing. And I think that can be helpful with productivity. What is the next right thing that we each need to do in our day, in our week, in our work, to keep our productivity engaged, and to also do it in a way that feels like the priorities are being focused on and that feel manageable and doable for people. I'd like to share a little video. It's a consultant who does a lot of work. He's out in the white collar sector with businesses and so forth around productivity, and he's being interviewed about productivity and just sharing some stats about productivity during this COVID time. I won't show the whole video, but I just want to let you have a moment to think about this and hear what someone else has to say about it.
So tell us a bit more about the survey. What are your clients telling you about the lessons learned from this pandemic, and what does it tell us about the future of work post-COVID?
Thanks, Yvonne, and I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me. First of all, I think you said it starts with the white-collar workforce. Obviously, essential workers, a lot have been continuing to work at the company locations. But it was the pivot of the white-collar workforce that really characterized the first half of this year. And to date, still 70%, although obviously it's coming back in a few countries around the world. I think what all of our clients and us ourselves as a white-collar workforce company, have found that we have been able to migrate work, probably exceeding our expectations, to be done on these virtual remote platforms more than we expected. And so we've all had to adjust, and our clients are doing that. And there's a reasonable amount of variation by country, by type of job, by the mindset of the individual employee. But by and large, it's exceeded expectations that work can be done this way. And then we'll see now what happens as we get through COVID and out to the other side.
Not just for advisory services like yourself, but we're seeing it in retailers, this whole trend of an omni-channel way of working now. Is that equally good for everyone, Manny? Is there a way of working, is this way of working better for certain businesses versus others? How can you tell?
I think what you'll find, Yvonne, is that it's going to be a large variability in how it actually works for different job functions, frankly, from different mindsets based on your home situation. So we use the term omni-channel. If you look at what happened to retail industry as maybe as an analog, there are things you want to buy via e-commerce, and there are things you still want to go to a physical store for. And that mix is now applying to actual professional work. Some things clearly you can do arguably better via all of these remote work platforms. And some things you still need to be able to have the physical interaction and meet, whether it's deep relationship building or collaboration that requires physical proximity. So there's not going to be a one size fits all. I think what we're finding, as you referenced in the survey, is that each company is going to have to adapt to a world that won't be the same as what it was last year.
Okay, I'm just going to stop there and invite you to think for yourself, your productivity. Has it felt higher, lower, up and down during this COVID time? What are you seeing in your colleagues? As managers, what are you seeing in your staff? And to just hold that and keep it in your awareness that that is something that's been impacted, of course, during these times in lots of different ways. And as you can see where I stopped the video here with this interview, some of the considerations behind a successful or in support of a successful return to work are things, of course, continuing to be around employee safety and client needs. Here he's talking customer demand, but our client needs, what are they needing at this time? What's going on in our communities and with stakeholders and so forth? And what are the new ways of working? What's possible? What are things we've learned that maybe we can bring forward as we re-enter work? Things we never could have imagined before that may in fact influence how things evolve out into the future. One of the things about productivity is being sure that we're having a very compassionate approach to that. People want to do and be their best, and some people, may be having a hard time working at the level that they did before, or maybe working so much, they may be working more than they ever have before because of the demands and needs, and that might be very true for many of you here. And so that is an important thing to keep in mind, and I'll say more about that in a moment. Another thing that's really important right now as a strategy, as a leader, a manager, and with and for our colleagues, is it's important to acknowledge feelings. Because people are holding so much, and I'm sure you know for yourself, that we need to have more spaces for this processing, especially in high care work, where your work is about helping other people. We must take care of our caregivers, and in many ways, that's all of you in some way. And to know that people are feeling different things, sadness and grief, and that we're not necessarily going to change that, but we can change how we greet that. Can we have a little bit more space for the conversations people might need to have to process how they're doing, including during this transition time of re-entry to work? Again, remember, transition is our emotional responses to change, the change being coming back to work, our adaptation process to that change. And so this is a wonderful time for listening, and listening without judgment, and listening with compassion, and not trying necessarily to fix any of this, because some of this is just way beyond what we can fix, but we can offer relief by acknowledging how people are feeling. And that includes acknowledging how you're feeling as a leader, if you're in a leadership role. I was reading an article about leadership strategies in a Harvard Business Review article on leading during this re-entry time. And one of the articles said that we must allow people space to grieve. Wherever there's been loss, there's grief. And there's the loss of, even the loss of working at home and coming back to work. That might be a loss for some people. Some people might be so excited to get back to work. Other people might be resistant to it, might be fearful of it, and so forth. So to allow space to grieve, whatever that might mean in your teams and workplace. Another important strategy at this time is to really pay attention to workload. And I can hear, and from my conversations with Sabrina and other members of the AMSA team, that workload's really high right now in your sector, and that isn't going to change. There's always a lot to do. There's always more need probably than resources. And now, of course, with the Afghan resettlement, there's a whole other layer of need and people and realities to navigate. And so being able to pay attention to workload, keeping burnout prevention as a core awareness, keeping employee well-being as a priority, because it's really important to retain the staff that you have. And lots of workplaces are dealing with employee shortages, or just not having the capacity to meet the demand and needs, and that's in many sectors. And you'll know best in your own sector what that's looking like. But in our healthcare sector, for example, people are working harder than ever under very complex circumstances, and people are burning out. And the long-term implications of that in any system of care, including your own, are matters to be considering now, not just later. So workload management within the reality that you have, what's needed, what kind of supports do people need, resources, acknowledging realities that may be less than ideal, and doing that in a meaningful way so that people feel validated and appreciated for the work that they're doing is really important. I want to mention something that I'm seeing happening, and if you've spent 5 minutes on Facebook, you'll know what I mean. It's kind of in our midst right now, and I think it's causing a certain amount of strain. And it's happening in workplaces and teams as well. And that is a term that's known as toxic positivity. I know that sounds like a bit of an oxymoron or a paradox, but of course, as leaders, we need to be positive. We want to bring a positive, optimistic, hopeful energy to our colleagues, our teams, our overall organization. And strong leaders do that. Many of you know that. You do that every day. And there's also what is known as toxic positivity. And this is a term by definition it's a belief that someone might hold that no matter how dire or difficult a situation is, that people should maintain a positive mindset. It's that good vibes only approach, always seeing, what's right about what's wrong and so forth. And while there's benefits to being an optimist, and I'm one myself, and engaging in positive thinking, toxic positivity is what happens when we reject that there's difficult emotions. We just sort of override them in favor of a more cheerful approach that often can be actually falsely positive and be a bit of a facade. And this is definition is by Dr. Rachel Goldman, and she writes a lot about toxic positivity. The point to keep in mind here is that we want to be positive, and we also want to be genuine and real and authentic. And that means having the capacity to be that bright light, to be that bright spot, to be that optimist, and also hold the space for the more difficult aspects of what's going on, and being able to do both. Because what happens when people are, and of course, positivity is helpful. It is part of our resilience. It's part of our that sort of grit we have. It's our ability to keep going. But it also is something that we don't want to have so much of it that it doesn't give the space for people to feel how they're feeling, where it might shut people down or make them feel ashamed or make them feel guilty if they're also not feeling optimistic and positive. And a lot of people are not feeling optimistic and positive right now. They're trying to, and they're working hard at it, but it is taking more energy and under the circumstances of the pandemic and all the realities of that. So just to yes, keep our positive energy going, and to make sure that we're not overgeneralizing positive or overgeneralizing statements like, well, it must be meant to be, or just comments that can really dismiss the complexities of feelings that people might be having. So a toxic positivity is something that it doesn't just stress the importance of optimism, because in and of itself, that's fine, but it also minimizes and denies that trace of human emotion that aren't strictly happy or positive. So we want a both and, not just an either or. So things to remember as leaders and managers, and for all of us to remember, is that everyone will be feeling differently about re-entry to work. So there's no one size fits all in terms of a response. And pace matters as people adjust and cope. They'll need more communication. They'll need to know what to expect next, at least a little bit. They'll need to know what is expected of them. What are the priorities? Where does the focus of their energy need to go? And they'll need additional support from their managers and leaders to help answer those questions as they come back into the workplace. And you might feel ready to move on as an individual, as a leader, but other people might be moving on at different paces, and they might feel resistance to being pushed too much, too fast. So we have to keep adjusting to what people are needing. And of course, to remember that people will remember how they were treated during this time. People will remember how they were treated coming back to work, how they will be appreciated for doing their work during this time. They will that will leave an imprint in terms of how they feel about their workplace, about their employer, about the work that you do. And I always think of one of my favorite quotes by Maya Angelou, the late Maya Angelou. And she said, "I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." And we're at a very opportune time as individuals, as leaders, as society, to really consider how are we making people feel as we all navigate these complex times, including as people re-enter work. I'm going to take a look at some team strategies for re-entry to work. Then we will take a quick little stretch break. We won't take a full break, but a little stretch break. And then we'll move to look at some individual strategies and open it up for some questions. So if you're having any questions along the way here, thoughts, nigglings, feel welcome to put them in the chat. We'll be turning to them as we go forward here. Team strategies. There's many, but I think what's really important right now is really paying attention as colleagues and as teams, as leaders of teams, to what will people be needing? And to ask that question in your own groups, what do people need right now? And how can that need be met? What do they need for pace, for direction, for communication, for support, for information? What do they need in very practical resourced ways to do what they're doing as they re-enter work, or for those who are continuing on and have been there all along? There's people who've been on the front lines all along who are now welcoming colleagues back who've been working at home in some situations. So we're all of those things to keep in mind. What do people need and how can that need be met? And the only way to know that is to ask people. And you can do that at staff meetings and individual conversations. You can do that through surveys. Some large organizations are doing some, just gathering information from their employees. And to keep in mind as teams and working groups that people need time to restore themselves and to regroup. It's not just a flip of a switch, oh, we're back, great, here we go. There's going to be some of that, of course. People are adaptable and resourceful and resilient. Some are very keen to just get going. But there will be a restoring time that's needed. And people need a chance to integrate their experiences of the last year and a half plus, including what's been learned. What have they learned about themselves, about their work, about how they work, about anything that might be relevant to the work that you do and to the team work together. It's a wonderful time to start to, and now and into the future, mine some of that learning and see what that wisdom has to offer for the future. It's an important time to engage in team building activities and re-engagement activities. And not just the content of the work, but also how the people are feeling who are doing the work. And that will be really an important part of that resilience and burnout prevention, is to keep staying aware of how people are doing and what they need, and making that support as forthcoming as possible. It's also important for teams to take time to share their successes. There's been so much incredible work done during this COVID time. It's really, I mean, if you pause and think for yourself, and you'll know best about that, think of what you've done during this time, this pandemic time, this unprecedented time. Think about how you've got up every day, who you've helped, the conversations you've had, the workload you've carried, the things you've managed in your personal life, how you've managed for yourself and your own well-being. Think of things that have been new and innovative and adjustments that you've made. Think of things that your colleagues and team members have done. Think of the ways you've met on Zoom and had Zoom meetings and Zoom conferences. Think of the crises you've responded to, the support you've offered to your clients. So much has happened. So many amazing, incredible things have happened during this time. I hear about them every day in my clients. I see it in my own work, and I see it in my friends and colleagues, and I'm sure all of you do as well. And we want to shine a light on that, because orienting to what's going well, particularly in difficult times, reminds all of us how strong we are under pressure. It helps us remember how resourceful and capable we are. And it also is helpful to acknowledge what's been challenging, which is why that was part of your small group discussion. And to do that in a compassionate way. I don't know anyone who hasn't had some sort of challenge during COVID, small or large. There's been challenges, there's been stressors. Very few people have had a zero or neutral experience with all of this. And so we want to acknowledge that in a compassionate way. And what I mean by compassion is that we recognize that human suffering is present and that we're all part of it. There's a common humanity being shared. And that strengthens us in our work, strengthens our clients to bring that perspective. So these are just some ideas at the team level, and really balancing out what are the team needs and the working group needs and the organization's needs with individual needs, because all of that has to work together as best it can. And so you want to cultivate peer support opportunities. You want time for integration, for teams to regroup, recalibrate, and you want reflective time so people can actually learn from this experience and take good parts of it forward. So really having both that approach to self-care being important, but also I like to think of it as self-care and we care. How are we caring for one another in our teams, and how will you stay connected to your colleagues? And that can be colleagues directly in your workplace, but also for some senior leaders, that's connecting with other senior leaders at other organizations and membership organizations, connecting in with AMSA resources and so forth. So being able to connect with colleagues in really kind and caring and supportive ways. And of course, we always try to do that, but now is a good time to really ramp that up. What kind of kindness is needed and caring and support? And how might that be different right now than under normal circumstances? So I'm not going to break you into small groups for this, for the sake of time, but I do want to invite you to think about these questions, and you're welcome to even put some responses in the chat to generate some of that energy with each other. But anytime we can tap into meaning and optimism and hope in authentic ways, it strengthens us and it strengthens each other to do that together. Just like if we're with our teams and colleagues, if we're all talking about something that's very negative and distressing, that can bring the energy and the mood and of the whole group down. Likewise, when we're in our teams and working groups, if we can talk about what we're feeling proud of, what we're feeling good about, what our successes are, what our aspirations are, that has an uplifting, a resourcing energy to it. And that's what we're trying to tap into. So what are you feeling hopeful and optimistic about within your work right now? And what is a recent success you've had in your work? And that could be recent this week, recent this month. And feel welcome just to share a few ideas in the chat if you like. It'd be nice to hear that from each other. I want to briefly look at some individual resilience strategies for re-entry to work. And I'm going to go over these fairly quickly because in many ways they might serve as reminders to things that we know and already do, and to just underscore how important they are at this time. And then we're going to open it up to questions. So at the individual level, there's some things that can be really helpful right now. And these are wonderful self-care practices for us at the best of times, and they're really important right now. So one is setting realistic priorities. because we can't do everything. And there's a lot to tend to right now. So when we know we're focusing on the most important things, it helps us direct our energy towards those things and to feel like we're putting our attention in the right places. So we need to set our priorities for ourselves, but we also need to do that in our teams. And it's important to have direction from managers and supervisors around what the organizational priorities are. So at every level, at the leadership and organizational level, at the team and at the individual level, this whole focus on priorities is really helpful right now. And those are work tasks, and they're also re-engagement processes. So we want to make sure that we're setting priorities in those different places. The work that needs to be done and the process of returning to work and re-engaging with colleagues in the workplace itself is also a priority. And what are the actions and things that are going on specifically to support that side of things? You want to take care of your body. How are you sustaining this physical vessel that has to hold all of this in meaningful ways? Simple things like staying hydrated, having some healthy snacks and meals so that your body's being fed for well-being, getting enough rest and sleep. And that's been hard for lots of people when stress is higher. So even taking those purposeful pauses just to rest your body. And of course, moving our bodies, even small movements, stretching at your desk, getting out for a walk, getting into nature, getting some fresh air. All of these things contribute to our vitality and our well-being. So how have you been taking care of your body lately? And just to sit with that reflection, what's supporting you physically? You want to take care of your mind. And right now, part of that taking care of our mind includes protecting it from an onslaught of negative messages, news overwhelm, rumors, toxicity. There's a lot in our midst that just paying attention to it can overwhelm our mind and cause more stress. So how do you do that? How do you stay informed and aware, but protect your mind from too much overwhelm of what might feel negative? Taking some tech breaks. We're all spending a lot of time online, in many cases, a lot more. A lot of life's been being lived online. Even things like weddings and birth celebrations and all kinds of things have happened during this COVID time in the online space. That's changing, of course, now as we're more open. But taking time to recharge your mind and just unplug can be so restorative. So really asking each and every day, how are you sustaining yourself? How are you filling up your own well of support and resources so that you can really give from a place of fullness and replenishment versus depletion? Because it's very hard to give and care and do the type of work that you're doing from a depleted state. And I realize that you may in fact be doing that right now, and you're not alone. Walk into any human service, social service, healthcare, frontline essential service during this time. And there's a lot of feelings of that depletion. So that's why taking care of these parts of ourselves, it's critically important. Really focusing on what you have control over. There's a lot about this pandemic that we can't control at all. There's a lot about life. As we know, we can't control it all. But when we can put our attention on controlling the controllables, our own responses to things, how much time we spend reading the news or scrolling Facebook, and so forth, we get in a more empowered place, and that is uplifting and replenishing in and of itself. Practicing gratitude. And I don't mean this in any sort of toxic positivity way, but rather there's very strong research that shows that gratitude can magnetize our mental health and resilience. So being able to find things throughout our day that we're grateful for, it helps to strengthen us and orient us to see those things. We can do that in our teams, we can do that in our overall workplaces, in our personal lives, and just holding that question within. What's something, again, this idea of what's going well, or one thing you're grateful for in the past 24 hours and why. And keeping those types of questions in the foreground helps to naturally pull us in the direction to that which feels supportive to us, that feels good to us. And that, of course, contributes to our well-being. And when re-entering work, people might be focusing on what's being lost or what's being gained, but in the sum of the experience of re-entering work, what's going well. And I just invite you to put in the chat, and these can just be quick things and something you're grateful for in the last 24 hours. And let's just be generative. Yeah, having our jobs. Thank you, Natasha, my job. Just put some things in so we can get some gratitude energy flowing here. My health. Thank you, Marcella. Support of friends and family. Thanks, Ryan. My dog. Oh my gosh, our pets. So many people have got COVID pets. They're just helping us so much. Our family, my daughter, have a great staff team. My family, a walk with my friend last evening. My daughter made me lunch today. Nice, Bethany. My dog, Teddy. My team. Yeah. It's uplifting just reading these things. Thank you. Another important tip for our resilience is to really take time every day, many times a day as you can. I like to think of them as many mindful moments more often, but where you ground yourself throughout the day. And that can be very simple. I'm just going to take us through a brief exercise now. If you like, you can close your eyes or lower your gaze. But anytime throughout your day that you can just come into awareness of your breath. Let's just try it for a moment together. So just notice your inhale, pause, the exhale. And know that that pause is available to you in each and every breath you take. And on your next inhale, just imagine that you're breathing in anything you want to receive in this moment. Could be energy, peace, calm. Just imagine on your inhale, you're receiving that quality into your being. And on the exhale, just imagine you're releasing and letting go. Doesn't have to be of anything in particular. Just being with that energy of letting go. On the in-breath, receiving. And on the out-breath, the exhale, releasing. Just allow yourself now and then throughout your day to really connect with your breath. Let it bring you into the present moment. Let it support your vitality and energy. And also to ground yourself. And you can do this, for example, right now by noticing your feet connected to the floor. Notice your feet touching the surface of the floor beneath you. So if your legs are crossed or maybe you're sitting with them tucked under, just allow them to drop down and make contact with the floor beneath you. And notice that connection your bottom of your feet are making with the floor. Letting that connection ground you and anchor you. Notice the chair beneath you. Notice it supporting your physical body. And notice what it feels like to be supported by the surface beneath you without any judgment. Just notice the feeling of support, the feeling of being grounded and centered and present. Just notice what that feels like. And when you're ready, if your eyes are closed, you can open them or raise your gaze. These are small things that you can weave into your day. Noticing your feet on the floor, noticing your breath, really taking that time. It's helpful between clients, for example, for those of you working, serving clients. Between client conversations, client sessions, to have some body-centered, grounding, transitional thing you do to kind of just clear from the one, to move forward to the next, so that you keep coming into your own sense of presence. And these are just some of the individual resilience strategies that can be helpful during this time of re-entry to work and this continued COVID time. Setting realistic priorities, taking care of your body, your mind, focusing on what you have control over, practicing gratitude, and taking time to center and ground yourself. So I want to give you a chance to think for a moment, looking back over what's been shared in this time together, and we're going to have some question time in a moment. But we've looked at the current reality and reflected on some of the re-entry to work needs. We've looked at leadership strategies, team considerations and strategies, individual strategies for resilience and transition, adapting. Based on this, what is one action that you'd like to take as a result of your learning from this webinar? Or it might be one thing you want to remember. It might be a word, it might be an idea. And I just want to see some of that come up in the chat. So one of the things I'm going to do with my team and my organization is build in more time for check-ins at the beginning of meetings. We have so much to do, as I'm sure all of you do, and we've been getting in the routine. Our meetings have been virtual, where we just sort of have a quick hello and then get into our list of actions and discussion points. But I'm going to build into our agenda a 10-minute check-in window where we can go around and just talk about how we're doing, how we're feeling, and kind of let that be in the space before we get into action mode. And I have a team meeting this afternoon, so I'm going to build some of that in right away. Resilience, toxic positivity, acknowledgement of our situation was really wonderful. Got lots of ideas to share with clients. Thanks so much. When you think about it, we've learned so much. We don't even know everything we've learned yet. And there's so much we can pull from everything we've gone through individually and collectively to really let that inform our future and our work in meaningful ways. So we're going to do a fun activity in a moment, but I want to pause there. It's important to leave time in a presentation like this for questions or comments, and you're welcome to use the chat for any questions you have. So what questions are here? What are you kind of thinking about, wondering about? And it may be a comment, and you can either put it in the chat or you can put your hand up, and Shadreem is here to watch for that, and you can come off mute and ask your question, which would be nice.
Hi, Linda, it's Sabrina. I just wanted, we got a few questions via email.
Sure.
So one of the questions is really around, this uncertainty, things are starting to open up, We're starting to attend things a little bit more in person, going back to the office a little bit more. So do you have any strategies or tips really around how to combat, some of that anxiety, but also like how can that anxiety be acknowledged, when you're returning back to the office, when you're returning back to larger gatherings such as conferences or meetings, etc.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a common one. And I don't know that I have, a well set response. But the first thing that comes to mind is we do have to keep checking in with ourselves around what feels right for our continued safety. So we still, while things are opening up, safety is still a top priority. And so what do you need that to look like? We're also a little bit out of practice with some of our just basic socialization skills. Some of us, really have been at home. I used to travel near weekly for my work, and I haven't been on an airplane or in a hotel or out doing training work this whole pandemic time. And I'm just starting to do a little bit of that again. And I notice that what was once familiar feels a little awkward. It's like, okay, I have to readjust to this. And, just we're all sort of tapping back in, we haven't had socializing like dinner parties, and just there's an adaptation to coming back out into that level of engagement. And even for young people, I have 2 teen boys, and my son went to a sleepover and he was really exhausted afterwards, which of course they don't sleep at sleepovers. Any of you who are parents know that. But the point was, it took a lot of that extra energy to be in all that engagement for all that time, when there's been a more, less of that output. So just to notice how you're feeling, honor how you're feeling, do what feels right to you. If you're feeling anxious, to acknowledge that, even for yourself, and to do some of those self-soothing, self-calming things, self-talk that reassures you, doing some breathing that helps to calm you, really drawing on what you know about what can help with anxious feelings, and doing some of those things on a regular basis. And you can turn to resources online, very practical anxiety management types of strategies that can, just even having a couple of those in our toolkit right now, if you know that anxiety is being stirred from all of this, which it is for many, to what are some of the tools you're going to use to support you when you're feeling that way, and really turning to them and knowing you're not alone when you do that. These are just some ideas. Is there any other questions, Sabrina?
Yes, I received another one through a private message. You know what, it was more, the struggle that individuals who are in that middle management are experiencing, wanting to support their teams, but also, needing to be accountable to funders, to everyone. Do you have any suggestions, how for them, how if they're feeling this pinch between supporting their staff, but also, needing to make sure that, work and everything is done, needing to make sure that, staff who are returning to the organization, that it's being done in a safe and fair manner, and how can, and creating guidelines and ever-changing guidelines based on different COVID protocols. So do you have any suggestions or tips for this group who's kind of in this crunch feeling at the moment?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, being in that middle management position can feel like a crunch at the best of times. There's that reporting up, reporting out, meeting funding requirements, being part of the all organizational processes and policies and operations. And then there is that supporting, ensuring that the work is getting done, ensuring that people have what they need to get their work done. It's always a big space, that middle management. And I'm sure you can relate, if you're in that role, that you probably felt some of that pull and crunch, even before the pandemic, and now it's just compounded. And you're also trying to do that with a lot of unknowns yourself. maybe waiting for direction or waiting to see what's going to happen, but also things needing to be done right now that are urgent and time sensitive. And so there is the task and the process of the work and so forth. And then there is that support role and the people management process part of that role as a manager. And both require our attention, both require different skills. And sometimes being able to come back to that priority. Okay, all of this is necessary, but what are my priorities this week? What am I going to do on the task, operations, funding, reporting side of things this week? Specifically, what are the big rock tasks? And what am I going to do for this other part that I know is also important, which is this re-entry part, the support, the emotional support? What are my priority tasks that I'm going to do for that? And really being clear on what are your top goals, your top action steps, and writing those things down. So it's a real time for our time management skills and our discernment skills as managers. So for example, every Friday I take an hour at the end of the day and review what top actions I got done that week. And then I set the course for the following week. Here's my, and I type it out, and I'm sure you all have your own systems. And of course, it's always more than it can be done, but I orient before the next week even comes to what are the things I know already that are going to be my priority actions. And I sit down with my calendar and I put them in. And that can include that check-in call with Duncan, one of my main team members. That can include, the support pieces, the task pieces, the progress on project pieces. And so we really, as managers and leaders right now, have to draw on every skill we have for time management, people management, organizing ourselves, prioritizing our tasks, because there's so much overwhelm in our midst for most of us, that when we can feel like we are control the controllables, set the priorities and tend to those things as best we can, knowing that there's a lot going on around us that's pulling us off here, distracting us here, happening over here, but being very vigilant about your own management of your own energy, your own time, and what you're capable of. And also asking for help and delegating. So for example, there may be someone on your team who can be one of those peer support leaders and be able to, it's important to tend to that support piece, but you might not be able to do all of it as the manager. Is there someone on the team and the team itself? How can you support them to mobilize around increasing their support with and for one another, through buddy systems, walk and talks, check-ins, and delegating that out in a very formal way, if you wish, and calling on people to do that, knowing that you can't necessarily do it all, but it's important for it to happen. Those are just some ideas. I hope that's helpful.
Definitely. Thank you, Linda. And another question I received is, do you have any tips or suggestions when the upper management of the organization insists on returning to work, applying the practices that were in existence prior to the pandemic, and dismissing the new ways and practices that the staff and the teams have created and developed during the pandemic that are very effective?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question, and it's one a lot of people are asking right now. How do we bring forward new systems that have been learned and out of necessity embraced during this time that can have benefit to keep going with into the future, that mark a change in how it was done prior to the pandemic? And that's going to be a question of communication. Being able to communicate the new way, why it's beneficial, and really call on leaders where necessary to be open to hearing some of that. because anyone in a senior leadership position right now, being able to be responsive and adaptable and listen and hear what people need, hear what systems of care need, is going to be one of the great leadership skills of this time. Being able to integrate that and hear that. And leaders that want to just move forward as if nothing's happened, or just go, not as if nothing's happened, but just go back to the way it was, there will be missed opportunities for better ways of doing things that this has offered us. And there could be increased frustration because you don't want to create this feeling of us and them, frontline workers and middle managers and then senior leaders. We want this sense of an integrated whole where everyone is learning and listening and responding and adapting as a whole system of care. So it's not easy work, it never is, but it is a task of communication, and it is a task of orienting to that resilient, adaptable, what's possible, what's needed now, what have we learned, where have we been, where are we going, and take the time to mine some of that in a meaningful way through conversations and make decisions accordingly. And that takes extra work and time, but it will be work and effort that will be well worth it. And it will mark the success of a re-entry to work. And it will be also one of the things that marks retaining the workforce, in my opinion, and in the opinion of lots of people who are researching and studying this right now. Linda Duxbury is a good researcher to look at, and there's many others. Google Harvard Business Review and read the articles about what it's recommending to leaders at this time. Yeah. And leaders have a lot on their plates right now. So, being patient and compassionate with what they can hear and when they can hear it is really important, because everyone's, doing a lot and doing, their best and giving a lot right now. So we want to honor that too. Okay, I don't know that we have time for another question, unless it's a quick one. We do have our Mentimeter, and I know you wanted to offer some wrap up too. So, okay, so the Mentimeter is in the chat. Thanks, Shamdreema, for putting that in. There's a link to go to on another device. So if you have a phone or another desktop, and the question is, what is one word you would use to describe this webinar? And there's no right or wrong words. What is one word you would use to describe this webinar? And thank you everyone for your responses coming in. It's taking shape in this fun, colorful word cloud. So I'm sure some of you know with word clouds, it captures in bigger words the ones that are being used most often. Informative, helpful, compassionate, thoughtful, inspiring, supportive, insightful, practical, holistic, enlightening. Thank you. Well, I know how important it is to honor start and end times, and I thank you for taking the time out of your busy reality, and I hope to connect with some of you again in future AMSA events, and I wish you wellness and safety and good things on the path ahead. And we're given lots to work with here in these times we're in, and our hope for our future is powerful to have individually and collectively. So thank you so much for being here, and I do wish you well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Linda, for sharing your valuable insights, your strategies, your suggestions and tips. It's been really informative and helpful, like everyone said in the word cloud. And if you'd like to stay connected with AMSA, please sign up to our weekly newsletter, Settlement Net, and you'll see the link on the screen as well as in the chat. And so that's the vehicle that we'll use to inform you when the webinar recording has been posted online. And so on the next slide, we're just going to mention that as with all of our AMSA events, we will be sending out an evaluation after this email, and we'll be also sharing the PowerPoint deck. And so we ask that you fill out the evaluation form, as your feedback is really valuable to us, and it informs future training events and webinars. And also, AMSA is active on social media, and so we encourage you to follow us on social media. Our Twitter handle is at AMSABC, and we're AMSABC on Facebook and LinkedIn, and we share different articles, news, releases, research, facts, event information. So that's a useful tool to keep on following us throughout. And just wanted to say in closing, thank you so much. Thanks so much for attending, and hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.